Class is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good evening, everybody, here from Finland, and would like to welcome you to the activities, which is the Glamour program. I'm sticking for the moment, to the major glamour in terms of the planetary dweller on the threshold, which is the glamour of fear. You could say, well, it's just a second-rate glamour, but it's not. It's pretty universal, and it stops all our progress. And I think, given the contending parties and their different points of view, whether democratic or dictatorial, or whatever may be the bias, the fear of losing authority and power is pretty much there all the time. So, and some of these fears are very justified, it would seem. So we have to have humanity facing these matters with a level head and a sound heart. And, in many ways, psychologically, we can expect that as the American election approaches, it's going to get worse before it gets better. So, much is in the balance right now, and people are fearful for various reasons. And I certainly understand that. I just want to welcome Alex and Anne and Annette, Ario and Barbara and Britta, Carl and Catherine, Cindy, Georgina, Gretchen and Heike, and Jessica, Joan and Julie, Karen, Kim, Lorraine, Margot, Mariana, and Martine, Miro, and Yenka, and Olivia, Risto, Stacia, and Winnie, and Yvonne, and Zenaidi. And over here, keeping us straight and honest, we have BL and Joe and Michael, Stacy, key members of our communications work. So we're kind of ready to go, and our work today, I think it's the 150th program, something like that. And we've had about 90 readings from the book Glamour, a World Problem. So we're beginning a very important section on the dweller on the threshold. We're not going to finish the whole thing by any means. The dweller is so interesting. I remember getting a hold of a Manly Hall book when I was, just in my 20s. And I don't know, I was interested in the Masonic work at that time, and very interested. And this was called The Lost Keys of Masonry. And it harkened back to Egyptian masonry, and you saw the candidate with the Ankh holding that Ankh, symbol of Venus and of some kind of dispelling radiance. And there was this ghastly figure in front of him, and maybe even a little bit comical, I don't know. But it was sort of looked like the worst kind of monster, and he had to get through that. He had to ward it off. He had to pass by and pass through. And I think, there's a more sophisticated understanding of what the dweller really is, but we do have to learn how to transcend it and tame it and redeem it, transmute it. Basically it is an instrumental energy which, when the worst aspects of it are banished or dissipated, it's extremely useful. So this is one of our tasks, and we don't really see that dweller right away. You'd think, well, we're always dealing with the dweller on the threshold, but we're not. We're just dealing with some random faults that we have that are part of the dweller here. Eventually, the whole thing will appear. Meanwhile, we see kind of like a claw here and a tooth there and a fang there, you know. We don't really see the whole thing until later in our development. And then I suppose it's tough to deal with. So this next section is called the contrast between the dweller and its opposite, the angel of the presence. I don't know if the angel has ever been completely well defined, but I tend to look at it as much of the solar angel as can be projected from the Buddhic plane into the higher mental plane. And the old mantra having pervaded the entire universe, which is really the higher mental plane in this case, with a fragment of myself, I remain. So it's a projection of the greater solar angel, and it is the solar angel in a way guiding us as personalities, and also at a certain correct moment introducing us in ever fuller consciousness to the triad and the monad. So for me, the angel of the presence is a lesser expression of the entire solar angel. I think it would be impossible for the entire solar angel to project its whole self into the causal body, onto the higher mental plane. It still has its place, as the charts show us, within the cosmic ethers. And then a projection has gone forth into the dense physical body of the solar logos, which is the lower 21 subplanes. Anyway, we have to learn how to deal with this angel of the presence, which blends with our own monadic consciousness. I like to think of the monadic awareness in extension as existing within the causal body, blending with the projection of the solar angel, and then which we call the angel of the presence, and blending at a certain time also with the presence of the master, as we become more and more the outpost of the master's consciousness. So when you look at what our egoic consciousness might be, let's see if I have anything here. Well, I have a little something. But when you look at what our egoic consciousness on the higher mental plane might be, it's our own attenuated monadic awareness, narrowed down, you know, and transformed so that we can handle it. And it's an extension of the solar angel projected into the higher mental plane, and it's part of the presence of the master as well. It's kind of like a triple consciousness, as we are assisted by two types of higher consciousness, that of the angel of the presence and that of the master. You know, it's a little confusing for people. You know, what is the soul? When does he mean another being? When does he mean who we are? Does the monad have soul? Yes. Does everything have soul? In a way, yes. We have to clarify those thoughts in our mind. Otherwise, we are going to be imprecise in our use of terms. So let's just see what we've got here. I think it's always quite interesting to begin this subject. Interesting that it's D, and D is number 4, and it's the personality is the synthesis of the 3 lower vehicles. So we have a lot to do with number 4 when we're dealing with this dweller on the threshold. The entire subject of the dweller and its relation to the angel, and by the way, I do have, in esoteric psychology too, there's some wonderful, great, wonderful old commentary stanzas, and I have made commentary on them, not just written but also spoken, I think especially on Makara, and you can see what I said about those stanzas, which become very important as the third initiation is at least targeted. It may not be this life, it may be a couple of lives ahead, whatever, but at least it's in our sights. And those Angel of the Present stanzas are very, very deep. So you may want to read them again, and you may want to see what I had to say about them. The entire subject of the dweller and its relation to the angel, a symbolic way of dealing with a great relationship and possibility, and a great fact in manifestation, is only now possible of consideration. And we might say that man has thus far advanced. So it is possible. Only when man is an integrated personality, there's more and more of those coming up, does the problem of the dweller truly arise. So we can't, really talk about primitive man. We can talk about bad qualities, but we can't talk about any kind of integrated dweller or opponent to the higher life. Which, by the way, in astrology, I think, when you look over there at the 7th house cusp, you'll meet all kinds of partners, and one of them is the dweller. So it also has a lot to do with the sign Gemini when Saturn is found there. So there are different places in the horoscope where we might expect to see what is the dweller functioning, or how is it functioning. Only when man is an integrated personality, and we have to ask ourselves, are we, does the problem of the dweller truly arise, and only when the mind is alert and the intelligence organized, and that's good old Saturn. Okay, let's see what I can do here. I want to, maybe that's a little big, but that's so much Saturn, really, and Saturn is the major ruler of that house, which is the oh goodness, I'm not doing too well here, am I? Saturn. Okay. It is the ruler of the 7th house. It's really so strong in Libra, which is connected with the 7th house. So it is the hierarchical ruler, and it is the exalted planet in Libra. And Saturn is, that old devil, as they say. It is representing the dweller, your apparent opponent, but which is really offering you opportunity. Only when the mind is alert and intelligence organized, and when it talks about that, you've got to think of Saturn, as is becoming the case today on a fairly large scale, is it possible for man to sense intelligently and not just mystically the angel, and so begin to intuit the presence? What really is the presence, you might ask? And the presence is the influence of the monad as it is found in the lower aspects, such as the soul and personality. The presence is the monad, the interior nature of the monad. Presence and being and God, they're all the same, And, many presences may be around, and they're all presences within the greater presence, which itself is a presence within a still greater presence. And finally, there's only one presence after all. It's not an early consideration, but for people like ourselves who are trying to be students, diligent students of esotericism, it does make sense. We have to think about it. Only then does the entire question of hindrances, there again is Saturn, which the dweller embodies, and the limitations, Saturn, which it provides to spiritual contact, and the realization assume potent proportions. Well, you're up against it, and your enemy is what you used to consider to be yourself. It's not your real self, but it's a false and temporary self that our limitations of perception present to us, and then we get taken in and think, yeah, that's my real self. So, if Saturn sometimes represents the entire personality, then Jupiter represents the soul. And we have to learn how to, in one way, put Jupiter above Saturn, and yet in other ways, Saturn is above Jupiter. So it just depends on the point of view. Only then, once there is a degree of development, can they be usefully considered and steps taken to induce right action. I mean, DK talks about people who succumb to their dweller. And, they'll be taking the left-hand path if they do that, and it's the path that leads to imprisonment and to the moon, symbolically speaking, and to the past, and to the intelligence aspect of Mahat without the love aspect. And when they take the wrong path and they don't choose the right from the left, they become they give in to their dweller, they become the destroyer of souls on the first ray, the deluder or misleader of souls on the second ray, or the manipulator of souls on the third ray. So, only when there is a sufficient development can they be usefully considered and the steps taken to induce right action. Only then there is adequate fusion within humanity as a whole, only when there is adequate fusion within humanity as a whole, does the great human dweller on the threshold appear as an integrated entity, or the dweller in a national or racial sense makes its appearance, spreading and vitalizing national, racial, and planetary glamour, fostering and feeding the individual glamours, and making the entire problem unmistakably apparent. Now, we've been through this. We've had World War I and II, which is one great war, and basically humanity was up against its own dweller. And in that, Germany represented glamour, Italy illusion, and Japan Maya. And the battle was with the collective dweller on the threshold of the entire human race. And well, you can't say that the defeat has been total. It hasn't. There's still plenty left, but there was at least a temporary victory of the forces that were combating that dweller. So in other words, basically what DK is saying, that you have to reach a certain point of development before we can really talk about this particular entity and what it does to retard humanity and how it can be overcome. Only then, when he starts with the only thens, we know he's dealing with pretty much what's going on right now. Only then can the relation between the soul of humanity and the generated forces of its ancient and potent personality assume proportions which call for drastic activity and intelligent cooperation. I want to say that the big battle of maybe 4 million years ago, that we call the Battle of Kurukshetra, that involved an aspect of humanity's dweller. Maybe not so much. It was more, dealing with the dweller as desire than it was the dweller as mentality plus desire. So there was a kind of victory and yet a withdrawal at the same time. And the fascinating thing, as you know, is that the principal figures in that war came back 4 million years later. I think I'm kind of getting those figures from Philip Lindsay. He's the scholar who has done, I think, the best research on the time cycles of the Aryan, Atlantean, and Lemurian ages. The head of the Axis powers, the heads of the Axis powers, and the heads of the United Nations, as they had been called, were the same entities as the ones who fought it out in ancient days. They say south of the city of Delhi, in a great plain south of the city of Delhi. And is it even true that something like very advanced weaponry was used? Weaponry that we don't even have right now. Something even called the like lasers, like it's called the ray of Kapila. Kapila is one of the it's one of the esoteric Kumaras, I think. Anyway, very destructive force. So anyway, the time has come. Now humanity under Leo has advanced to the stage of more distinctive intelligence, and many are the individuals who are emerging or have emerged from the mass consciousness, and many are the individuals who under Leo or in Leo are heading for the first initiation. So we live in a time of transition into the Hall of Wisdom. And that transition into the Hall of Wisdom is basically the first initiation which the coming of the Christ, the reappearance of the Christ, will signal. In other words, when the Christ reappears, it will signal that the requisite number of human beings have taken the first initiation, so that we can say, in a general sense, humanity has taken the first initiation. So we need now drastic activity and intelligent cooperation to deal with the dweller. Now, look, we haven't even really conquered the glamour part of the dweller. We have not conquered the illusion part of the dweller, let alone the whole dweller. Maybe etherically we're doing a bit better because that's the first thing that has to be dealt with. The order would be etheric cleansing of the veils of Maya, and then the driving back of glamour to its own place, the place of Mara, Marakara, the place of evil on the astral plane, and eventually the conquest of illusion when humanity becomes more mentally focused, but we're still not there. Okay, so going on. Such a time has now come. And in the two books, written after the war, really, the problems of humanity and the reappearance of the Christ, and also in the Wesak and June full moon messages, I have dealt with this most practical and urgent situation, which is in itself the guarantee of human progress towards its destined goal, as well as the assertion of its major hindrances to spiritual realization. Certainly we, as a race, probably wised up considerably when we saw that, as DK said, Masonry had failed, the church had failed, our education had failed, educational methods, and those three failures on three rays were responsible for the fact that the Great War did precipitate onto the physical plane when hierarchy was hoping that it need not precipitate. So he's pointing us to certain books which tell us about the problem, and indeed we are hungry these days for the third installment of these bridging treatises, which will round out the Tibetan's presentation and give us such a foundation that we can support with our thought the externalization of the hierarchy and the reappearance of the real Christ and not just the imaginary Christ of dogma. The sections on which we shall now be engaged are of prime importance to all who are training for initiation. Remember now, he says, I say in training, my brothers. Okay, I did not say that you would take initiation in this life. Everybody gets so eager about taking initiation, it feeds the ambition. But as Master Hilarion says, act as one who is ambitious, but not really ambitious. Just have that same kind of intensity as the one who is ambitious. So in the little book, The Light of the Soul. So every true aspirant has taken the first initiation, he tells us, and every true disciple is preparing for initiation. And it kind of helps to know what initiation we're preparing for. As humbling as it may be, DK's some 50 or 51 students gathered to the periphery of his ashram were by and large preparing, and not necessarily in that life, for the second initiation. It was the one that was ahead, and maybe some few, just one here, one there, were preparing for the third degree. And Alice Bailey, no doubt, had taken the third degree, and so had Roberto Assagioli. So, we know where those students were focused, and we must not inflate. We must simply consider ourselves to be average disciples. Okay, so we're in training. We're in training for initiation, and I did not say you would take it, he says, right away. Let's get first things first. I know not myself whether you will or no. Now that is interesting. The issue lies in your hands, and in your planned destiny, planned by your souls. Your problem is essentially that of learning to handle the dweller on the threshold and of ascertaining, being certain of the procedures and the processes whereby the momentous activity of fusion, soul infusion, can take place. So it's very interesting, isn't it? I mean, I've mentioned it before, and there were not only this man who was Alice Bailey's secretary, but others in the group, and basically said, well, look, you have made more progress than either your soul or I anticipated. So indeed it does lie in our own hands, and the degree to which we adhere to our planned spiritual destiny. I mean, the monad, of course, has monadic destiny, but that's not so germane at this time, because we seek more to be governed by the soul on the higher mental plane than we do by the monad, because we're just not there yet, again. So fusion is the issue, and there will be a fusion between the disciple and the purified dweller and the soul. And there certainly will be an infusion of soul energy, which will help to purify the dweller and put it on the burning ground so that the dross will be eliminated. Now, we have nothing to gain by pretending that there's not plenty of dross still in our nature, which needs to be burned away and no longer deemed to be a factor of retardation, because in fact it is no longer a factor of retardation. We have purified it, and that is called transmutation. With transmutation, you purify matter. With transformation, you purify form. That's an important difference. With transfiguration, you glorify matter form, or form matter. It's maybe the first major glorification. I mean, in every initiation in the inner chambers, there's a kind of glorification, but the kind that you can demonstrate as Jesus or the Christ demonstrated before the humble disciples, that was a visible glorification of the whole personality under the influence of the soul. So we've got to know the methods by which this can occur. Through the medium of this fusion, the dweller disappears and is no more seen, though still he functions on the outer plane as the agent of the angel. So another way of saying this is that the ray of the personality becomes a sub-ray of the soul. Especially, the higher aspects of the personality ray are appropriated by the soul. And this is part of this fusion amalgamative process. And, we don't want to forever live in the situation where soul and personality are fighting. They may do that for quite a number of years or lives, but we want to get to the point where the outer man is really a subsidiary, a useful subsidiary of the soul ray. So this is interesting what happens here. See, the dweller, is kind of like opaque, kind of like stops the light, stops the love. But there does come a time when the dweller becomes translucent, light can pour through it to a degree, and then eventually transparent, which is even a higher stage. And then it really is an instrument, a useful subray of the soul. So through the medium of this fusion, the dweller disappears and is no more seen, at least not as the obstructive dweller, though still he functions on the outer plane as the agent of the angel. Well, at least let's just say, how can I put this? The evil qualities of the dweller on the threshold disappear. Okay. In other words, as I said before, we don't want to give in to our dweller. We don't want to be conquered by our dweller, as some people are, and then they become, the destroyer, deluder, manipulator. So the light absorbs the dweller. Think about that. Think about that. The light absorbs the dweller. And into obscuration, radiant yet magnetic, this ancient form of life dissolves, though keeping still its form. It's a bit like a Mayavarupa in a way. Mayavarupa looks like a personality, but it's not filled with lunar vehicles. It's a projection from the spiritual triad. And it has every capability of a normal personality, but it does not have the liabilities. So it's radiant yet magnetic. It rests and works, but is not now itself. This is paradoxical language, isn't it? So, it's a bit like the Jesus rises from the grave and Thomas doesn't think he's real, and basically Jesus says, well, put your finger in my wound and you'll see that indeed I am what I say I am, and yet it's not really the same lunar vehicle at all. It's something resurrected. It's something much higher in its nature, but resembles what was before, is fully capable, more capable than what was before, but is not subject to the liabilities of the lunar life. Well, so such are the paradoxical statements of the old commentary. And that's why, so often it really takes a lot of intuition to deal with interpretation of the old commentary, such as in this instance. And the attempt to interpret from the old commentary does also stimulate the intuition. So the dweller disappears and is no more seen, though still he functions on the outer plane, the agent of the angel, but without the liabilities. The light absorbs the dweller, that is, the light of the soul, as personality ray becomes the subray of the soul, and into obscuration, where basically something is veiled and clouded and you don't see it, radiant yet magnetic, this ancient form of life dissolves, though keeping still its form. What dissolves is the lunar aspect of it, but the form remains useful to the soul. It rests and works. Why does he put rest first, I wonder? Maybe because it listens in a state of rest, meditative rest, to the soul. It rests and works, but is not now itself, or not not the former self anyway. The dweller is no longer the former dweller, the former self. In form, it resembles, but it is non-obstructive, if I can say. Okay, gotta get rid of my pluses and put in dashes. All right, such are the paradoxical statements of the old commentary. Let's see, this is a pretty big section that's coming up here, and I don't think there's any way to get through the entirety of it. Maybe we'll just do, look at that, 9 points already, 10 points, 11 points. No, this is 12 points. And by the way, this is so interesting, giving the rays of the Aquarian age. In relation to the dweller and so forth, compared with the Piscean age, 14, 15, 16. Wow, this is a big section. So maybe it's so big that it's not bad to begin it just a little bit. Because I don't, if we overload ourselves we can lose our concentration on certain points that may have impressed us, and then we'll all be at sea, which is not good. We want to nail down this info. I have earlier defined for you, in as simple terms as possible, the nature of the dweller. I would like, however, and this is page 154, that's where we are right now, to enlarge upon one or 2 points, looks like about 14 points, and give you 1 or 2 new suggestions which, for the sake of clarity and for your more rapid comprehension, which every good teacher can utilize, the Tibetan's method, we will tabulate as follows. Okay, we're on page 154. We began at 150, and basically, I'm just going to do a little bit of this because there's a lot here to discuss and to see if we can catch some kind of image of the dweller and how to convert it, how to transmute it, how to transform it, how to transfigure it. Maybe it's something we don't think of very much, but if we were really, solidly standing there at the periphery of the ashram, and if the master were supervising, we'd have to deal with it. The students who were at the periphery of Master DK's ashram, he pointed out what they had to deal with. And it may not have been the entirety of the dweller, but there were certainly lots of things to correct. I was just reading in Letters on Occult Meditation, I believe that certain great entities that turn up to be planetary logoi got together for group activity and for mutual correction. It's very interesting, the idea that the affiliation of certain planetary logoi gave adjustment and correction to each other just by working together. And I think on our much lower turn of the spiral, that ends up being the case in the group work. Eventually, if we're successful in group work, we all adjust and modify and find ourselves correcting certain things that need correction within us because of the virtues, the strengths of the people with whom we are working. So even it extends up to planetary logoi, and why not to the solar logoi of the 7 solar systems, of which ours is one. I think it's a universal principle. Group work at whatever level leads to correction of the units involved in the group. So just a little bit here, if I may, because it's plenty long, and we'll get into more of it, Number 1, the dweller on the threshold is essentially the personality. Well, I just don't know how much more direct you can get than that particular statement. But by the way, the personality is not the disciple. What do I mean by that? That the disciple is the soul in incarnation. The personality is the instrumentation that the soul in incarnation uses. And it is at first composed of elemental lives that we call lunar lords. But that's not the disciple. We can't say that the disciple and the personality are the same. And then, of course, we can change our identification by extracting ourselves as the soul within the persona into the higher mental plane and focus our consciousness within the causal body. So there are 3 levels there. There is the soul on its own plane, in which we are consciously participating if we really knew how to meditate. There is the soul in incarnation, which is the extension of the consciousness into a state of limitation provided by certain lunar lords. So we are limited. We can't see what we can see when we're on the higher mental plane. And then there's the lunar lords themselves that we're supposed to be able to manage. We, the soul in incarnation, are supposed to be able to manage these lunar lords until we transmute them, transform them, redeem them, elevate them, you know, and that helps them be on their way with their destiny, you know, to become animals and to become human beings and so forth. Just go to page 844 of A Treatise on Cosmic Fire, and you'll kind of see the ascent of these different orders of lives, including the lunar lords. So basically, you know, keep this in your mind. It's not some monster in a Manly Hall book, the dweller. It is essentially the personality. It is an integrated unity, and note the word integrated because it's important. It's only when you are starting to get the integrated personality that it's sort of evil opposite or obstructive opposite. You know, the forces of obstruction are the forces of evil. It's only when the integration of the personality is really taking place that you can get that integrated dweller. Essentially, they're the same. It is an integrated unity composed of physical forces, vital energy, astral forces, and mental, lower mental energies, constituting the sum total of the lower nature. So he's so clear here, isn't he? We really have a battle going on with our personality, and different ray types who have different soul rays and different personality rays fight that battle in different ways. You know, you might say the personality of first ray personality is too independent and go it alone. Second ray personality is too sensitive. Third ray personality is too busy. Fourth ray personality is too conflicted. Fifth ray personality is too skeptical. Sixth ray personality is too enthusiastic in terms of errant tunnel vision leading nowhere. And seventh ray personality is too rigid, you know, getting stuck with certain habit patterns, and that's that. You know, the order of the form being the main thing. So different kind of battles will take place depending on the personality ray and also how you handle it as a soul. You know, first ray will handle that errant personality with will, and second ray with love and understanding and the proper use of energy applied wisely. And third ray will handle it through the power of acute mentality, and fourth ray will harmonize the situation and thereby neutralize whatever personality it may be, neutralize the tendencies, and the fifth ray soul will know just the right technique, the way to do it scientifically. The sixth ray soul, well, through a very directed enthusiasm that never relinquishes the focus until everything is brought into line, the sixth ray soul can work on whatever personality it may be. And the seventh ray soul has all these procedures and mantrams and formulas and patterns that can be used to subdue the personality. All that kind of information that I've just spoken of, you can find in my books on the rays. And it's important when you identify what is your soul ray and personality ray at the very least, that you figure out how you can win the battle on behalf of the soul and use the personality. So basically, returning to the statement, the dweller on the threshold is essentially the personality. I think that's going to be enough. We have 14 points here, but if we can make this statement ring in our consciousness as a truth, we'll have a more sophisticated, more mature look at what the dweller is, and we won't get into the horrification of the dweller, We won't get into that the monstrosity mentality. I mean, there are people who are monsters, and DK called Hitler a monster. There are others, I suppose, hugely distorted personalities. But this is the essential factor. And, it's so interesting here. I mean, I won't really get into it, but the next one says, the dweller takes form when a reorientation of man's life has taken place consciously and under soul impression. So, when your personality is rightly directed and trying to do the good or being used for the good, that's when the problem really springs up. So, we have to serve factually. When we're reoriented towards the soul, our dweller problem really begins. You have to think that, what are those subsidiary initiates of the threshold doing, initiation 1 and 2, when they can still veer off on the left-hand path? They had to have had some kind of idealism to get as far as they got, but then they got it wrong. They fell into a power-hungry state, and egoism began to form around them, and they limited their vision and veered off onto the left-hand path. So we have, I think, some very interesting items here in these 14 items, and I'm not going to push it too far right now. Let's see, what page are we on? Should know. And it looks like
we have made it to page 154.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Appreciate that. So I'm going back here and beginning program. Is this program 151?
Yes, this is 151, reading number 91.
Okay, right. Okay, good. I had gotten that wrong. Reading 91, and we started from page, basically we started reading from page 152, and we went to 154.
Correct.
All righty, good. Okay, so now I'm just going to transpose this down to point number 2. We have plenty to consider. It's going to be very interesting, I think. As we do so, and no, that's wrong. Oh, that's, let's see. Oh, well, I pressed the wrong button here, and I'm not going to fuss with it. So, the end, let's see. So did we just do 91? Is that what you're saying? We just did 151? Is
That
that
is
what you're saying?
correct. Yes.
Okay, so I was incorrect and reading 91, and today is the 24th. Always that 24 is important. Master Moria says, if you want to celebrate me, or remember me, do it on the 24th of March. 2 and 4 together, it's Shambhala. And it's Aries, one of the preeminent fire signs. When you kind of look at him, you get the impression that his two major signs are Aries and Leo. At least that's what I get out of it. So page 150, this shouldn't say beginning, this should say end. Sorry. End of GWP 151, 91, and it's page 150.
152 through 154.
Okay, wow, progress. And we'll be beginning here on the 31st of July. And it'll be a morning program, I guess. And it'll be program number 152, reading 92. And it'll be 154 to whatever it is. All right. Great. Whoop, no pluses, please. Don't fool around with two keyboards the way I am at the moment. Okay, friends. Now it's up to you. We've had some material here presented about the dweller. And as I say, it's a fairly advanced recognition. You don't just, if you have a few bad traits, you're not just seeing your dweller. So many people tend to say that, oh, my dweller is this, my dweller is that. Actually, all you're looking at is just an aspect of your dweller. Like I say, a claw here and a fang there. That's it. But the whole thing is much bigger process. And we have to transmute, transform, and transfigure the dweller. And that's what we're doing through the initiation process. And every time we cross the burning ground before the door of initiation, all of that is symbolic. We are bringing the dweller into a condition of the subray of the soul. Humanity has been fighting it out with its own dweller, and it still is. And what's happening right now is that humanity's dweller seems to be pretty much on the third ray, selfish, financial, acquisitive line, where the symbol of money is more important than the health of people or the welfare of people. And it must be overcome by the second ray soul, the eventual second ray soul of humanity and the second ray soul of the planetary logos at this time. So we have to overcome the third ray and substitute for it the second ray. And then and that battle is being fought out right in front of our eyes between the characteristic out of alignment selfishness of the third ray. I mean, you can be selfish on any ray, of course, but the love wisdom tendencies that are humanitarian of the second ray. It doesn't mean you don't have beautiful philanthropic people on the third ray. I mean, you do, but generally it is combined with the second ray when that happens. Okay, so if you...
We have several questions already.
Okay.
And Jesse asks, is there somewhere you have a written list of personality problems for the 1st through 7th rays?
Yes, yes. If you will look, I think it's especially in volume 2 of the Tapestry of the Gods that you can just download, from Makara, makara.us. All of the personality rays and their particular types of problems, when combined with all of the soul rays, are listed, or at least suggestions are given. I don't remember whether I did ray 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, and so forth, same soul and personality ray. He basically, the only time he mentions the sameness is in the integration formula for the first ray. He says there comes a time when the first ray soul can stand to have a first ray personality without losing its balance. But then the mind would be on the fourth ray, and the astral body on the second ray, and the physical body on the sixth ray. And so kind of a 2-4-6 balance would be there anyway. And he doesn't mention that in relation to any of the other rays, which is not to say it couldn't be. But basically, I have all those combinations in the book, and you can read and see what might fit you. When it comes to assessing your rays, just examine your life really closely, or interestingly, have your partner, or whatever, someone who knows you really well, take the PIP test for you. In other words, they answer as if they know you, and they describe how you seem to them. And it's often very interesting what they say, because sometimes you really see how you appear in the eyes of others. I thought I had kind of tamed my fanaticism, which has been pretty strong for a lot of lives. But then I gave it to someone who knew me really well, and this person is always calling me the fanatic. Okay, well, and that's kind of the way it turned up. That's how that person sees me, and I have to look at it carefully. Is it true? Is the sixth ray still very, very strong and has not entirely switched to the second ray? So you do it for yourself. You take the PIP test for yourself, and then you don't say much and give it to someone else who knows you really well, and compare the results, if they will, take the time to do it. I find that the new PIP test is not too long. It does take some hours maybe, but it's not the same as doing a month-long process on the Terra test, which is about 888 questions last time I looked. Now that's a whole, inner psychological process over time and with meditation. And Walter and I are, and some others are working on getting that into shape. But that's a more advanced thing. So, yes, in the book Tapestry of the Gods, on Makara, you will find what you're looking for in terms of personality and soul combinations. I don't dare reread it, because I wrote this thing 30 years ago, and you change, you improve and refine your perception. But I thought it was good enough, and I think basically it is good enough to help people get started.
And Joe has been kind enough to put the link for Volume 2 of Tapestry Gods in the chat box.
Yeah. Thank you, Joe. Of course, if you read Volume 1 before you get into Volume 2, if you can stand it, it gives you a good foundation. I do a lot of comparison of qualities, and so that it should sharpen up the mind when it comes to ray analysis. And even with the PIP, I don't say it's the final word, not by any means. I say it's a jumping off point. I think, you know, I went for years and years and years before I settled on a ray formula that I thought was pretty accurate. But if the Tibetan were to write to me, he might say, okay, well, you've made a mistake here or there. His students were always reversing their soul and personality rays. They just tended to do that. And they didn't know that they were doing that. And he reminded them that they were doing that. There was this person whose rays were 1, 6, 4, 6, 3. Soul 1, personality 6, mind 4, astral 6, physical 3. Well, the person in her application, she says, I'm a second ray soul. Well, the second ray was really something she needed to cultivate. But she was a first ray soul, and somehow she had the two things mixed up. She was a teacher of singing, and she approached her students with such a blast of outgoing power, as the Tibetan called it, that she basically chased them away, or the soul removed them from her presence. You know, so he tried to moderate her a bit, and probably it helped her to think that she was a second ray soul, because she needed that kind of moderation, but she was not. She was that extremely energetic combination of 1-6. There was another person in the political department, which just goes to show you, I mean, she was going to be a political worker, and she was a 1-6. Well, that fits real well with political work, and you wonder how a singing teacher turns out to be a 1-6 and a politician a 1-6, but thus it is. And as I recall, just to show you some of the complexity of this thing, that this political activist, you know, had the second ray as her personality ray, something like for the last 5 lives. And that was what made it possible to balance that 1-6 that she had. She didn't get very far, and neither did the group of political workers. He never finished getting them all together because basically the war intervened. So, you know, there are certain rules connected with the rays, but then every rule has its exception, and some of these exceptions did show up. If you want to see how rays transfer from rays of attribute to rays of aspect, the 1, 2, 3, you know, 4, 5, 6, 7 to 1, 2, 3, you read the instructions of HSD, because there DK talks about the laws of transference. And it is quite interesting. This is one of those examples of a 6th ray soul who was trying to make the transference onto the second ray and, you know, not doing especially well. The two people who tried to transfer from ray 6 to ray 2, both of them did not do especially well in this incarnation, so it seems. Okay.
We have a question from Yvonne. How far was Hitler when he veered off?
Probably around the 2nd degree. And the story about Hitler, now, you know, there's so much kind of drama around this thing, but if you want a good kind of operatic read, you can read the book called The Spear of Destiny. And this ties in with the myths around which Wagner created certain operas, and in this case, the opera Parsifal, which was his really, really Christian opera. You know, he turned very Christian. After doing everything with the Norse gods, his last opera was so Christic, if you will. And there was this character who was once a knight of the Grail, but he was an errant knight and he failed. And he became committed to producing the failure of the other knights of the Grail. And he would lead them into temptation through the garden of the flowers, the garden of beautiful women, and etc. That was the temptation for the knights, and some of them fell. And his name in the opera is Klingsor, Klingsor. And in his possession was the Spear of Destiny. I can't remember how he got it, but it was supposedly the spear that pierced the side of Jesus and caused finally the death of Jesus. And then whoever had that in their possession would always dominate. So, you know, in operatic style, you see him holding the spear and singing certain things about his credo, about how he will drag all the knights of the Grail down. And that man was supposedly Hitler, according to the author, Trevor Ravenscroft. Sounds like a very Seventh Ray kind of name. Trevor Ravenscroft, who wrote The Spear of Destiny. If nothing else, it's a good read. It's been a long time, and it's pretty horrific, but it gives you kind of a historical approach behind what may be an antecedent incarnation of Hitler. So, you know, Hitler was an intelligent initiate of the lower kind, and he veered off. You know, he had Libra rising, and you can make a choice with Libra at the center between the left-hand path and the right-hand path. Maybe even DK was not sure what Hitler would choose, even though he had a very scurrilous kind of career in the past, you know, lives of selfishness. But at length, it appears that he chose the left-hand path under his rising sign, Libra. And of all things, here is, you know, just think about the Sabian symbols. Two very intelligent astrologers thought they were really worthwhile and that they were an ancient Chaldean treasure trove. Mark Jones and Dane Rudyard, and the degree of Hitler's rising Uranus in Libra, you know, it was all about racial consciousness, was symbolized a Jewish rabbi. I think it was 20 degrees of Libra, something like that, right around in there. So that really kind of, you know, portrayed one of his roles and one of his obsessions, and he was a notable figure, and probably, according to the Tibetan, one of those figures that showed up in Atlantis leading the dark side of the Battle of Kurukshetra. So anyway, Trevor Ravenscroft, The Spear of Destiny, Klingsor, Hitler. It's a wonderful opera, by the way, because along comes Percival or Parsifal, who is the fool for God in a way, and he represents the purified, naive person who is very good, and he overcomes all of these problems. Maybe, you know, Hitler probably, he loved that opera, you know, He probably thought, this is the true Teuton overcoming the evil, without realizing that he himself may have been the main source of evil in that tale of Parsifal. So that's the irony of projection. You think the other guy is the evil one when it's really you. It's, you know, for someone who loves opera, and I was an opera director for many years, it's worth getting into. And you will, there's some wonderful music about the Knights of the Grail, and it's got great idealism in it. Another place that Hitler shows, not Hitler, but Wagner, well, you know, the two were, but another place is in Tannhäuser. This is interesting because Tannhäuser is the knight who fell again. Very interesting. The same theme. And eventually he is redeemed. But there's something there called the Pilgrim's Chorus in Tannhäuser. And it is such a magnificent sixth ray march full of faith, you know. I don't care what religion anybody happens to be, they'll see the dedication of it. The pilgrims are coming from a great distance. They're very, very quiet. You hear in the distance someone singing. They get stronger and stronger. They cross where you are in a full glory and then go off into the distance and everything quiets down. It's just, listen to the Pilgrim's Chorus from Tannhäuser with the translation underneath it, and you'll see, you know, how beautiful it can get. Okay.
Jan writes, thank you, Michael. Would we be able to equate what Jung describes as the shadow side in the same way as the dweller as it's being described here? I am not an expert on Jung, but it sounds so similar. And the process may be identifying these particular expressions of the dweller, understanding them the best we can, and being vigilant in their integration to render them harmless.
Yeah, my general response to what you're saying is yes. When we're dealing with the shadow in you know, in the psychological integrative dynamics of individuation as it's found in Jung, yes, the shadow is the unsuspected aspect of ourselves that we project upon others, and yes, it's a great obstacle, and it's especially great when we don't know what it's doing. So rendering the shadow conscious is a very important process, and rendering the dweller conscious and not projecting it on others is the same kind of dynamic. We have to be able to look into the dark and bring it up into the light. And you can understand how some of the psychological work we have to do with ourselves is preparation for the first initiation, because Pluto is involved. And Pluto and Vulcan particularly are involved in that kind of work of bringing the darkness into the light. At least that's Pluto, and then Vulcan is imposing the higher will upon the personality. So the general idea of the equivalence of the shadow and the dweller, I think you could go with that kind of hypothesis. Obviously, there's a whole occult lore around the dweller, but if you compare it with how the best psychologists deal with the shadow, probably you're going to find something similar in how occultists deal with the dweller. I'll call it the burning ground in occultism, and maybe you know, in-depth psychology, the exploration of the dweller and its well, is the word redemption, or at least its understanding, so it no longer interferes. So I think my response to your kind of question is just a general yes. I think so.
And Suzanne writes, thank you for dealing with this most important subject. Always know you've done your job when I am left with more questions than answers.
Yeah, well, that's it. You know, the very first commandment out of 4, if I can call it that, is inquire the way. So as we go deeper and deeper and question ourselves and answer our own questions, more questions will appear. We're on the great quest, and we use questions to get there. And one day we discovered that the seeker and the sought are the same. So when we question ourselves, we find the object of our questioning in ourself. We are the seeker and the sought. And the other morning I was reading those 7 mantrams, and that's the 6th ray one. The seeker and the sought are one, I rest. Yeah, well, look, you know, we have to know our forgotten self, the subconscious self, because otherwise it goes down into the hidden realms and causes trouble. We don't even know why we're doing certain things. We're being prompted by tendencies which are hidden from our conscious mind. We've got to do a psychological exploration, especially if you're on the 2nd ray or 6th ray or something like that, 2, 4, 6 line. You have to do a psychological exploration before the first initiation can really be taken. And then between the 1st and 2nd, a lot of heavy psychological work is being done, where these issues of purification, de-glamorization, and, you know, even the beginning of the removal of illusion, these things are pursued. So thank you. Yes.
Anne asks, when the dweller is transmuted, is that the end of karma?
Well, you know, there are different phases of karma, and karma simply means action. So every time we act, we create conditions, good or bad, and the conditions themselves are the karma. You know, the old saying, you make your bed and you lie in it. So, you know, or the tree you plant today is the forest that you're walking through tomorrow. So every time you act, you create a condition, and then the condition surrounds you, and the condition is the karma itself. And we don't forget, of course, that planetary logoi have karma, solar logoi have karma. All the great beings have karma. They have created a certain condition under the spell of at least partial ignorance, and then what they've created, they have to live through until when is the end of karma? Well, you know, it's going to be the end of the universe, but basically the end of karma is when the condition perfectly, or as perfectly as possible, reflects the archetype. There is an archetypal arrangement, which is purpose. And then there's a bunch of conditions on the lower planes, which I call the mosaic world. You know, it's all divided up into parts and pieces, and the arrangement usually isn't very good. But when the ray of right arrangement, which is the 7th ray, really gets to work and arranges everything out here the way things forever are, archetypally in there, then there's nothing more to be done, and that phase of karma is over. But, you know, if a person says, oh, I've taken care of all my karma, well, every being in this cosmos has karma. Maybe the only way the karma is finally expiated is by the universal logos itself, because there is no other being in the universe. And then we can say that that particular karma pertaining to the somewhat ignorant actions of the universal logos, because that being, though huge, is also blinded in a certain respect, that massive universal karma is over. And then we'll have a new creation and a new becoming and new sets of activities and new adjustments and new possibility of distorting or accurately reflecting the arrangement that we call archetypal purpose. And it'll be a whole different process, and it will involve dealing with our actions. And that's karma. And another way of looking at it, from Dane Rudyard, he calls it the unfinished business of the past. So there may be kind of a point of equilibrium where you say, oh, okay, that phase of maladjustment is over. And I have conformed to the archetype. And then the pressure of spirit, which is ultimately the pressure of the great logos of the universe, pushes you on into new disequilibriums in the hope of expanding and deepening, and then more maladjustment or occurs. Maladjustment either for good or for ill. You know, you can have a lot of good things which are not intended, and they tie you up the same way the bad things do. So always the spirit pushes you on from a state of repose and karmic adjustment into new phases of action, which are new phases of karma to be dealt with.
Okay, Jesse has written two things in the chat box. First, thank you, Michael. Please provide more information about DK's HSD instruction.
Well, you just go to Discipleship in the New Age, Volume 1. I forget what page, but HSD, the Disciple HSD, there's certain instructions there, and you can find it in her instructions, no problem. You just look up HSD either without periods or with periods, and it'll take you to her instructions. And somewhere in there, you know, just look at the range of pages, and you will find what you're looking for. The transference.
And then the second is working on the dweller is about accepting the monster that me, so that it can no longer do its work in the dark that I do not see.
Okay, we got a little mantra poem there, and that's true. The dweller hates the light, you know, and we call it sometimes the suppression of the sublime, or the repression, which is even worse. It's like an unconscious forgetting of the sublime, and we call it, basically, it's a retreat from the light. So there's a lot of people that don't want that light shining on them too strongly. As DK once said, you know, to a person who was psychologizing a lot of people, he said to him or her, I can't remember, do you think that you could withstand the group gaze? So the group, you know, kind of looks on at you, and it's revelatory. It all, you know, much comes to light through the group gaze. We just have to be willing to tolerate that particular kind of pressure, because in the group, remember, you know, the group leads to self-correction leads to correction of the participating units, whether they're people or planets. There will be a correction, and the correction has a lot to do with being exposed and having the group actually see you. You know, a lot of people are hiding themselves or feeling that the other members is not their business and they can't really see me if I hide and all that. But people are pretty perspicacious. They can see, you know, and especially when there's more than one eye involved here, a lot of eyes. And then you have to be able to relax in the presence of the group gaze and correct what is happening as a result. So it was tough for the disciples. They were under Master DK's eye, and I suppose Alice Bailey's eye, and they were under the eye of their fellow group members. And if they were sensitive, you know, and still afflicted with a lot of wanting to appear to be what they weren't, then they would suffer from the contrast. They didn't want to be seen, you know. But in this kind of work, you know, it's in the rules of the road. You've read maybe the rules of the road. Just go to Dyna 1, Discipleship 1, rules of the road. Each sees and knows the villainy of each. And yet there is, with that great revelation, no turning back, no spurning of each other, no shakiness upon the road. The road goes forward into day, the light of day, intuition. So read the rules of the road if you haven't read it recently, because it's got wonderful advice. And that thing about seeing each other and knowing, you know, our foibles and our problems, everyone knows everybody. That's part of that goes with the turf, you know. Okay, what did I miss something there? Was there?
No.
No. Okay.
The last question before we go into the glamour meditation. Yvonne asks, would you repeat what you said about Saturn in Gemini in the 7th house?
Well, it's even to Saturn and Gemini. It brings out the conflict between the dweller and the angel. So I don't know how easy it would be to find, but I think, let's see here. Saturn doesn't have two T's, does it? Saturn, Gemini, and well, that's one, and Earth and Saturn, and it's here. It's here. Is this it?
I think towards the bottom of that paragraph that you're showing.
Yeah, from certain angles, Saturn can be regarded as the planetary dweller on the threshold, for humanity has to face that dweller as well as the angel of the presence, and in doing so discover that the dweller and the angel are that complex duality which is the human family. Saturn, in a peculiar relation to the sign Gemini, makes this possible. So that's one of the references about that. Basically, it's a squaring off of the two aspects, higher and lower, that we find in Gemini. Now, if it's also in the 7th house, see, because Saturn in the 7th house just generally is you're meeting what's called the open enemy. There's the hidden enemies of the 12th house. This is old classical astrology. And then there is the open enemy of the 7th house. And that's where you can meet the dweller regardless of what sign it may be in. So, in fact, Okay, and here, well, there's just certain places where Saturn in relation to, here's Gemini and the pairs of opposites, doesn't say anything about Saturn. So the place where we were just now is the place where Saturn and Gemini are brought together in the same discussion. You will, let's see about this one. You will note how 2 out of the governing planets of the decanates, in the case of the ordinary wheel, serve to enhance the planetary rulers of the sign Gemini, Gemini with Saturn, offering at a fairly advanced stage the opposition needed to bring about a basic revolution. So this is kind of like the reversal of the wheel, and Saturn and Gemini are both involved in that. See, the quarreling brothers, you might say, are Mars in Gemini. They just fight with each other. But Saturn means you really do something about it, and face it, and deal properly with it. Let's see if there's anything else. No, that was the last one. There's a couple of references there, as you see. Some of us were born with Saturn in Gemini. I know I was, and but not in the 7th house. It's a different thing. So I can interpret it in various ways, including the way that DK is suggesting. Okay, so that's it then, right? I think so. And
Yes.
then, yeah, okay. Very good. So let's work a little bit with this glamour of fear. Again, somehow it's just, he says fear is the major dweller on the threshold for this planet. And it's deeply involved in substance. Substance itself is tainted with the factor of recoil from the light. Recoil from the light. So, we see that. I mean, people rationalize like crazy. I was just noticing what they say, and they're just denying. I was just noticing something that Israel suffered greatly when it reopened its schools, and there were huge spikes of the coronavirus because of the school reopening and what happened when the kids brought it home and to others. And in the United States, they're just denying that. They're not even looking at it. It's just the fear of losing power is so great that they just deny. So every situation is different. Every country is different, but we're told that when the Black Lodge sees that a man is fearless, they regard it as a very bad sign for their objectives and goals. Okay. Video faculty formula. Okay, so glamour of fear. We'll work on that. I have a feeling that if we could solve that one, we could solve a lot of them, because it's something fundamental about not wanting to face what has to be faced. So, however many of us that we are at the moment, yeah, quite a few. I'm not going to read everybody's name right now, but I'm just going to say that we think of all the group members who are gathered here right now. And, I think you can see who they are if you want to see, but, we're just all in this together, and under view, you can, I think, see who are the attendees if you want to, but that's not so much the important thing now. So we just dwell for a moment with the idea that there are some, maybe 50 of us, almost 50, gathered here, working together wherever we may be. And this is serious work, and he wouldn't include the protective formula if it wasn't necessary. So we use the cross of divinity, forehead, heart, left eye, right eye. And we trace light as we do so, and as we do so individually, there's a big cross being traced, cross of divinity, cross of light being traced before the entire group. And we protect by saying, as a soul, I work in light, and darkness cannot touch me. I take my stand within the light. I work, and from that point, I never move. And feel the protective power of that cross of divinity, cross of light. Guarding the group and every individual in it. And then we focus the light of matter and mind, and we focus on within the lower mind, raising the point of matter, the light of matter, up into the mind and blending it imaginatively with the light of reason, logic, mental understanding. So two are one on the plane of mind, and then we meditate on soul contact, and we recognize the light of the soul. And we bring that light down and make of three lights one light. Soul light joins the light of mind and the light of matter. And from that triple light as one, we will be projecting onto the astral plane our beam to detect glamour, and our beam it's the same beam to dissipate the glamour we detect. And we say, the light is one, and in that light shall we see light. This is the light that turns the darkness into day. Oh. then we use a formula combined with the power of visualization, and as we use the formula, we visualize the great searchlight made of the many little searchlights. They combine and they extend together as one great beam upon the astral plane. It's like tuning into the desire body, and if not our own, then the desire body of humanity, which is directing the great majority of human beings. And certainly demagogues know this. So, radiance are we, and power. We stand forever with our hands stretched out, linking the heavens with the earth, the inner world of meaning and the subtle world of glamour. The world of meaning is the world of the soul. We reach into the light and bring it down to meet the need. We reach into the silent place and bring from thence the gift of understanding. Thus, with the light we work and turn the darkness into day. We're going to work with this burning, illuminating beam of light, and we strengthen it through the invocation of spiritual will from monad, atma, jewel, sacrifice, petals. We are consciously strengthening the beam, the group beam of light. And we say, with power upon its beam, the light is focused on the goal. Our goal is to help to dissipate the glamour of fear, a major, major glamour, the major obstacle on our planet. The dweller on the threshold, basically, of our planet. And we think about all that humanity has lost through the power of fear. maybe all that each individual and you yourself, I myself, have lost through succumbing to this power of fear, this glamour of fear. Then we use these words of power, the power of our united light prevents the appearance of the glamour of fear. The power of our united light negates the quality of the glamour of fear from affecting humanity. The power of our united light destroys the life behind the glamour of fear. So we're going to continue in 5 minutes of silence and intensity of purpose with the penetrating into the glamour of fear and producing its weakening and its dissipation, its banishment. We need to help humanity dispose of the glamour of fear. 5 minutes. if we can make a mark here, banish it from our lives. Maybe you've seen those leadbeater drawings about what the aura looks like when it's assailed by the gray pall of fear. We have to dig for it sometimes to find out what we're afraid of, but you know, if we had no fear, we would have passed the fourth initiation. So even if it's hidden, we have to learn to detect it, banish it, and help to banish it from human consideration. Humanity at the moment so divided, so separated, so fear-driven. So now we withdraw our beam from the astral plane and focus again in the mind, shutting down that beam, redistributing the light of the soul, of the mind, of matter, redistributing and sounding the Om 3 times, knowing, feeling that we have done a little something on behalf of the dissipation of this major, fundamental, insidious glamour. Want to thank you for being here. Tomorrow we continue with the Soul of Nations. We'll be continuing some readings from the wonderful political book, Destiny of the Nations, The Destiny of the Nations. And we're still looking at the indirect influences of the rulers, major rulers that Ray and astrological that apply to the United States. We'll be finishing that tomorrow. We can start another major country and try to understand how to work with those energies. And every one of us, of course, has to work with the given or hypothesized energies of our particular nation, so that the soul of the nation will respond with evocation. It will come forth. So that's going to be tomorrow evening. We'll see you then, if you can. And lots of love and many blessings. I want to say from the whole Glamour team, Tuya, Olivia, myself, and all of the communications group that certainly are free of glamour by this time, as all of us are, right? And we'll be working with you as we go on. And, you know, we're producing whatever we can. Go to YouTube now, and you'll see new books on which there are commentaries. And if you want to study, there's plenty to study. So many blessings, lots of love from all of us, and will be here's to working with you. And for all of us, we can say with Master Moria, it is a joy to do the Master's work. Hopefully the work we're doing is the Master's work, and it is certainly a joy. So we'll be in touch. Bye-bye.